Next sitting day. I call on Members' Order of the Day number 2.
Education, Charter Schools Abolition Amendment Bill, first reading.
Jenny Salisa.
Whakalawhalahi atu, Mr Speaker, and I move on behalf of Chris Hipkins that the Education, Charter Schools Abolition Amendment Bill be now read for a first time. I nominate the Education and Science Select Committee to consider this bill. I welcome this bill proposed by my colleague Chris Hipkins, which would abolish the charter school model. And I'd like to acknowledge and congratulate Mr Chris Hipkins and Jade for the birth of their new baby earlier on this evening, as well as all the work that he has put in to this bill. Charter schools, Mr Speaker, are a blight on our educational system. They bring nothing to the table that cannot be offered through our existing education system. They take much needed dollars out of our educational system that would much better be used elsewhere, as we've seen here in New Zealand as well as overseas, with charter schools being unreliable and being a failed experiment. We have seen here in Aotearoa, Mr Speaker, at least one of our charter schools at Whangaruru has been closed. It is a school where 5.2 million at least of taxpayers' funding has been invested in, and we do not know even to this day whether any of that money will be returned to the state. Mr Speaker, the charter school model is one where it is profit-driven. When we look at the 5 charter schools that were in 2015, Mr Speaker, just the 5, there were at least millions and millions of dollars being invested in the school, in the 5 schools in 2015, and as much as about $5,000 per student profit was actually made in one of those schools. Overall, the charter schools, in terms of their sponsors, in 2015, $1.5 million was returned to their sponsors, Mr Speaker. Money that would be really well invested in the state school. I refer, Mr Speaker, to the amount of funding that is now going to be allocated to students who are termed as those with really special needs, those who are at risk, at really high risk. We know, looking at the calculations that the Labour Party has done, looking at all the schools across New Zealand, but looking at South Auckland, at Manukau East, the schools in Manukau East, an area that is full of Decile 1 schools, at least close to $100,000 is going to be lost from many of the schools in South Auckland. And I'll give you some of the quotes from those schools. Aotearoa College, $15,000. It'll be short by. The #1 school that got the Prime Minister's Premium Award this year for being the best school in New Zealand, Macaulay Girls High School, they will be short by $15,000. And the list goes on, and it adds up to close to $100,000. Meanwhile, we will continue to invest a whole lot more of our taxpayers' money in these charter schools. When the charter schools were actually introduced, we were told that they are going to be a partnership school, that they are going to be a model that will bring in private money, funding from outside. What we know to date, though, Mr Speaker, is 100% of the funding going into these charter schools comes from the government, taxpayers' funds. I don't know why these schools are still called partnership schools, because it is not a partnership model that does bring in private equity funding from the private sector, as we were told it would do. So, this bill that Chris Hipkins has introduced will abolish charter schools in its entirety in New Zealand. All students in New Zealand deserve to be taught by qualified and registered teachers, and they also deserve to have access to a broad, innovative, locally relevant New Zealand curriculum. The curriculum that charter schools are not even, they don't even have to teach New Zealand's curriculum. Parents and whānau deserve to be full partners in their school communities through a democratically elected board of trustees. The best school for the vast majority of New Zealand students should be their local state school, rather than choosing to divert resources into an experimental charter school regime. The government's focus should instead be on every state school, making sure that every state school is a great school. It is indeed the school where the majority of our students in New Zealand currently attend. State schools, that is, and state integrated schools. Charter schools are not as transparent as state schools or indeed integrated state schools, and we deserve to ensure that we continue to provide taxpayers' funding going into schools that are transparent and accountable to parents as well as accountable to us as taxpayers. Charter schools are exempt from the Official Information Act of 1982, despite the fact that the majority of their funding is taxpayer funds. Mr. Speaker, charter schools are also, as I said earlier on, not required to teach the New Zealand curriculum. This raises serious concerns about the quality and the direction of charter schools. The charter school, excuse me, Mr. Speaker. The charter school scheme overlooks the widely accepted understanding that educational achievement is linked to poverty as well as increases in income inequality. Charter schools is supposed to be the solution, the answer to ensuring that the educational outcome of Māori and Pacific students are actually addressed. However, it doesn't actually look into some of the reasons why Māori and Pacific students are not actually achieving inside of the school. Things like income inequality, things like poverty, things like when a lot of our students enter school, they do not have the same level of skills as other children. Mr. Speaker, this bill, which we hope will be agreed to and passed, will absolutely get rid of charter schools. We believe that ensuring that our state schools are well funded is the way to go. Right now, this government has frozen the operational funds for the compulsory sector, and they have said that instead they are looking at funding at-risk students. And when we look at that funding that they actually propose will be instead, it's something like $92 per student. Something that one of our school leaders has said that would fund like half a sandwich per child per day. $92 does not actually go far enough to ensure that educational outcomes for Māori and Pacific students are indeed addressed. Charter schools, as of October 2015, only served a total of 680 students. 680 students, Mr. Speaker, and it actually totaled so much of our taxpayers' funders in terms of millions and millions of dollars. Why is it that this national government keeps on agreeing with the ACT Party to continue to invest so many millions of our dollars on an untested, failed model, the charter school model, a model that has failed here as well as overseas? Charter schools, Mr. Speaker, is allowed to make a profit. And as we know, every single one of those charter schools made a profit in 2015. Education is a public good. It shouldn't be a system where we are looking at profit making. We should just look at ensuring that all of our students, when they attend schools, come out, graduate, come out with the right level of skills without actually having profit as the ultimate driving model for a particular school. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.